Thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time out for this afternoon session. I really appreciate it. I'm privileged on behalf of Verizon to provide you an insight into a data breach investigations report. And as the word itself says, data breach investigation. I'm going to touch upon the data breaches, the investigations aspect, and the analysis and the synthesis of the incidents and breaches we've analyzed in the form of this report, which we publish on every year. This is our thought leadership and our commitment to the security industry. We've been doing this for many years, and I'll go into the detail over the next 45 minutes, right? But before I start off, right, I just wanted to ask a question to the audience. How many in the audience have come across DBIR report from Verizon before? Oh, great, thank you, thank you. So, and I assume you using it and you find it useful? Yeah, great. Oh, thank you. Appreciate that feedback. Okay, so the agenda. I'll briefly touch upon the report. I'll walk you through the methodology, and I know some of you have come across the report before, so I'll try to make it useful and touch upon the changes we made in the recent years. We'll look at the 2015 caseload and findings, which was included within the scope of our analysis for the 2015 report. We'll move into the trends. What do we learn from the 2015 report versus what we saw in the previous year's report, so you can see how we're doing, how effective are we, right? Are the bad threat actors getting good, better than us all the time, or are we beating them up, or what is it, right? And what have we learned? And the next steps, what can we do with the knowledge and the information you learn from the DBIR report as part of your roles and responsibilities within your organizations? If you're a CISO, a VP, a CIO, or someone who's responsible for governance, risk, and compliance activities, or developing even a business case, for a specific technical or a procedural or a people-centric control within your organization. So I'll walk you through that, and then I'm going to touch upon the public sector specific. This is the state of California. So what I've done is I've extracted some specific data points with regards to public sector, right? What are the challenges we face within the public sector? What can we learn from the 2015 DBIR report in terms of the top 3 incident patterns, right? What are the challenges? What can we do to address those? That's what I'll focus upon, and hopefully that will give you a good investment of your time this afternoon with me for 45 minutes. So briefly touching up on the database investigation report. The first point I'd like to raise is there are so many breach reports out there. You probably read or hear about so many breaches occurring in the external media. Does the Verizon DBIR report tell you everything what went wrong globally? No, it does not. Is there anything else out there which tells you what went wrong in the previous 12 months on a global basis? There isn't. But what the Verizon Data Breach Investigation Report does is we have a number of international contributors who share their data with us, real security incident data. Our risk team analyzes that through a methodology, which I'll walk you through, and we present the findings. So when you look at it as a security professional, right, in order to tackle data security, we need to understand our threat. Whenever risk is a subjective process, risk is never going to be zero, right? Okay, risk is the threat landscape is changing, it's very dynamic, right? Okay, what can we do to be more impactful? And that's where we are coming from. Yeah, if this is a journey on the research. We've been doing this for almost over a decade now, and I'll touch upon it as we go forward. So I just wanted to set that scene that it is real security incident data from a number of international contributors being analyzed, and we share the findings with the world. And by the way, I asked this question. I've been a security professional like you all for many years. If such a report was published by a 3-letter acronym organization, what would be the data classification of that report? Absolutely, right, thank you, yeah. So, this is our commitment, Verizon's commitment to the security industry, saying, hey, we want to share these findings, we want to help the industry, our customers, our partners, so that we can learn what the bad threat actors have been up to, what makes them successful, what techniques are they using, so that we can learn from it, apply in our own scenario, and we can defend against the changing threat landscape, right? So what can be done to prevent it is ultimate goal, we want to, of the next 45 minutes. So just a little bit on the history. Verizon has been providing forensic services and investigative services. And just to give you a small example, Verizon has been involved in 9 of the 11 largest global data bridges from a forensics and investigative support to organizations. So what we thought in year 2008 is that if we can summarize the lessons learned from these investigations where we've assisted customers, it'll help the industry. So in 2008, we published our first DBIR report just based on the Verizon caseload, where our investigations team have been assisting customers. And on an average, if I look at the last 12 months, we do over 400 investigations per year from a forensics, retainer services perspective. Live investigations across all verticals, not just public sector, but retail, financial, manufacturing, and so on a global basis, right? So 2008, the first report was just based on Verizon caseload. And then US Secret Service joined us in the subsequent years, and in this year's report, we have 70 international contributors. So from 1 to 70 has been our journey of this data set. So we're trying to share this meaningful, analysis in such a way that we can put it on the internet and share it with the industry. And today's, me being at this event is our commitment, to help our customers from a risk and infosec programs perspective. So it's been out for almost 8 years. We get millions of downloads. About hundreds of media articles are written. But the main interesting key point is it provides you data into useful and actionable intelligence. Because as I'll walk you through the methodology, right, okay, its ultimate goal is to who did what to whom and what was the outcome. Yeah, so if we understand the threat better, right, then you can take an appropriate action from a risk management or an infosec program perspective so that you can address the risk. I'm not saying that you don't look at the other areas of the risk, but at least it gives you the areas where the bad threat actors have been successful in the recent years. Okay, so I thought I'll just bring out some of the logos. So the key messaging over here is that it's not just government. It's not just, organizations like US Secret Service within the US. So first of all, it's global. Yeah, we have, the FBI, the DHS, similar sort of organizations across Europe and Asia Pacific. We have the Australian Federal Police. So it gives you a wider global perspective, from a government, public sector type organizations. By the way, we have one of the state agencies who shares the data. It's Commonwealth of Massachusetts, who shares the data with us as part of the DBIR report. The other aspect to this is that it's not just public sector. We have the academia like the Carnegie Mellons and so on who share their data with us. We have the infosec providers, the service providers likes of Deloitte, the FireEye, the Kaspersky, the Akamai, you name it, the technology vendors share their data with us, right? And then we have the various CSIRTs, response organizations who share their data with us as well. So as an individual or when you're working within your organization, this gives you not only a global perspective, but a different vertical set perspective as well, because it represents data from all the various facets on a global basis, right? And for I've just listed them out. It was very hard to put 70 logos on a single slide, by the way, everything what you see on my slide, a copy of the report, it looks like this. There's a Verizon booth. There's members of the Verizon team. They'll be happy to give you a copy of the report. If you're looking for the link, you can just do Google, or we can send you an email with the link. So everything in detail analysis is available. What I'm going to be doing is help the navigation of this report quicker by walking you through and making it very personalized from a public sector perspective, right? So these are the examples of the 70 organizations who share their data with us. So how do we do it? As you can imagine, it's global. We have various types of organizations involved in it. They are providing security incident data. So how do we do it? What's our methodology? What's our framework? It's called VERIS. And the focus is we focus on 4 aspects: actor, action, asset, and attribute. So if I just walk you through, as I mentioned, 70 international organizations are giving us their security incident data. So you may have a help desk system like a Remedy or whatever implemented, and they are providing us their security incident data to Verizon. The security incident data is aligned to this framework, so it focuses on external. where does the actor come from? Is it external? Is it internal? Or it was some kind of a collaboration between the two for that particular security incident? What was the action the actor took? Was it malware, social engineering, hacking? What was it, right? Because the more we understand about the incident, it helps us with the analysis, with the findings, and so on. What are the assets the bad threat actors are focusing on, right? Are they focusing on a web server? Or is it a BYOD asset? What is it they're focusing on, right? And what was the attribute? So when the ultimate data loss occurred, was the confidentiality, integrity, or availability was compromised? So it provides you the end-to-end visibility across the incident. And by the way, this framework is freely available. Should any of the customers want to deploy that as part of their internal, it's freely available. The link is at the bottom of the slides. And the entire methodology is explained in detail. There's a blog as well, which you can use it, for internal consumption. So this is the framework we use. And just to give you an example, when 70 international organizations are sharing the data with us, it could be categorized in 3 ways, for example. One is some of them use Veris. We have some organizations who don't use Veris, but they're aligned to Veris, right? And then some of them we work with to bring it together using Veris. Because ultimately, we need to provide the consistency of our analysis across all the security incident data we receive. But one thing you could do is that organizations can develop like a DBIR for their own organization. And we do that. So we help our customers saying, okay, we have the data breach investigations report. If you have a security incident data for 12 months or 24 months or so, we could do some benchmark analysis and give you a perspective of how do you compare versus what's happening on a global basis. So let's look at the 2015 data, the corpus. So as I mentioned, 70 contributing organizations. There were about 80,000 security incident data we received from these organizations. And there were just over 2,100 confirmed data breaches, and 61 countries were represented. Well, what does that really mean? Well, first of all, there's a difference between a security incident and a breach. Every incident doesn't lead to a breach, thank God. Otherwise, we will have a huge challenge, right? And we have a very clear definition. Is that when an unauthorized disclosure to an unauthorized actor was made, or a user was made, that's when it's a data disclosure. So some form of data disclosure had occurred, right? And this just gives you a high-level perspective. So it's global, 61 countries represented over here. And let's look at, so this is the Bible of our report, right? I call it. And what you see on the screen, it's there in the document as well. So the first thing what we try to do is the international organizations are sharing security incident data, right? If you are in public sector, right, you perhaps sometimes say, what happens to a manufacturing company may not be that relevant to me when it ultimately comes to implementation of some kind of a risk management or a risk control, to an extent, right? To an extent, okay? So what we try to do, we use the North American Industry Classification System, which is published by the federal government, right? So each and every security incident is mapped to the North American, the federal government publishes the ICS code. So what you see on the left-hand side, the industry within the bracket 72, that's for accommodation. So I've just highlighted the public sector, right? So for public sector is 92. So when we received the security incident data, how many incidents were from public sector? That's what I'm highlighting over here because it's mapped to the code number 92, right? The second thing what we do at a high level is number of security incidents. We try to break it down between small organizations and large organizations, because when it comes to recognition, understanding your threat, to organization who has tens of thousands of employees versus someone who has less than 1,000, there's a difference, right? So we say small, less than 1,000 employees, and large, more than 1,000 employees, right? We do have some cases where we don't know, and we are transparent and we say unknown. So in these cases, what we could not confirm was the number of employees within the organization where the incident had occurred. So it gives you that granularity from international organizations mapped to the vertical down to the size of the organization. So when you're doing your risk assessment, for example, you're doing your profiling and so on, you have the specific threat input, right? The second thing what we do is the confirmed data losses. So again, similar analogy here, small and large, and where we don't know, we say unknown. So for the public sector, so let's just look at public sector. Within the public sector, there are 50,315 security incidents. So the first point to note is, out of 80,000, over 50,000 incidents are from public sector. Now, there's a reason behind it because of the the requirements for organizations to report, that the incident had occurred. Number one. But for you all, it's beneficial because it gives you that perspective that's saying, because public sector is your focus area. So out of 50,000, there were 19 in security incidents where less than 1,000 employees. But majority of that, almost 50,000 occurred for large organizations where more than 1,000 employees, right? So when you're developing a business case, this data comes in very handy as we go through, right? Now let's look at the breaches where there was some form of confirmed data loss had occurred, right? So there were 303, whether you call it the breaches or situations where the data loss had occurred out of 50,000 incidents, right? And that's broken down into small and large organizations as well, but the majority of large, right? So sometimes, let's take a pause and ask a question. How are we doing versus the year before? Right? So I thought I'll just put some data from our previous year's report, just for the purpose of saying, we're all professionals, we all have responsibilities, objectives, we've been working on some form of implementation of controls or an InfoSec program. So in the previous year's report, in 2014, what we published, there were just over 47,000 security incidents and 175 data loss had occurred. So the number of security incidents across public sector has gone up by 3,000, and the number of confirmed data loss has almost doubled. So how great are we at what we're doing? And you can ask the question, is the bad threat actor getting good at what they're doing? Yeah, and that's a question for all of us as professionals, right? So I'll just bring it back just to give you that perspective, because I think this is very useful and relevant. And by the way, you can do this for the last so many years. All our past reports are available online, okay? And you can use this for the purpose of your analysis or risk assessments and so on. Okay. So let's move forward. So what can we learn? The question we ask is public sector the only vertical which is the top three verticals which are most impacted are financial services, the information, and the public sector. And I just wanted to give you a perspective of public sector versus the other verticals, just to say what's happening outside the public sector. See if there's any lessons to be learned or there's a knowledge share to be obtained. So when you look at the financial services, for example, again, the reporting requirements within the public sector gives us a large number of security incidents, right? But it's getting, the same is coming across the other verticals as well. But let's look at the financial services. 642 number of incidents, right, and 277 confirmed. So the number of confirmed breaches across financial services versus the reported incidents is almost 50%. And public sector is a very few percentage of the overall number of incidents. So you can read this in many ways, right? Okay, and I just wanted to give you a couple of examples. But the important thing I would like to highlight over here is that since last year, we started capturing information about the secondary victim. See, because nowadays, if you look at the attacks, the threat actor, when they're distributing the malware, for example, through a strategic web services or a website or so on, they have no intention to carry out a compromise to the website from where the malware is being distributed, right? Okay. Their goal is that ultimately they're expecting their ultimate target, the secondary customer will visit, they're hoping them to visit the website, they'll get infected by visiting the website, the malware will be distributed, right? And we started capturing that since a year ago. And this year's report is the first time we are sharing these findings. 70% of the attacks show secondary victim, right? 70% of the attacks show secondary victim, right? And 75% spread from victim 0 to 1 within 1 day. So can you imagine how resourced and how organized the bad threat actors are? They're not coming direct to you. They're going to a website, right? Okay? and they're hoping that you will visit because they've gone through some analysis and they know that the likelihood for you to visit this website is significantly more and you'll be infected. Yeah? So something to learn, and I'll talk more about the malwares and so on as we go through the report. So I've just shared with you about what the DBIR report is, what the methodology is, and the high level in terms of the incidents and breaches, right? So let's go into the understanding of the threats into detail now, right? So, as security professional, I've been a professional. I've worked across defense, public sector, finance, various verticals and so on. And, sometimes I say it's a poison chalice. There's so many assets we have across the organization. There's so many vulnerabilities out there. And there's just not enough time and resources to address every vulnerability, every exploit for every asset. There's just not enough hours in the day, right? Sometimes it feels like that way, right? Okay. And what Verizon did was we analyzed all the security incidents, not just the breaches, of the last so many years to see if there was a pattern of some sort. And 96% of the security incidents can be categorized into 9 incident patterns, is what you see on the screen. And we published this first time in 2014, just in the previous year's report. And it's been well received because how does this help? If you are someone who is involved with the policy or implementation of a control or a governance risk and compliance, I'm a member of the ISACA organization, and when I speak to the auditors, I say to them is when you go and do audit, focus on these 9 areas. Because your goal is to help the customer not just to be compliant, but ultimately help them to manage the risk across the enterprise, right? So these are the 9 focus areas where 96% of the incidents can be categorized, right? And let's go into detail because we are able to transpose these 9 incident patterns across hundreds of thousands of incidents. Now, as we go into detail, as I said, we have a challenge, right? There's so many assets, so many vulnerabilities, right? It's challenge to keep up. Can we be more impactful? I'm not saying that you ignore the rest, right? But what makes the bad threat actor successful, right? Are there any common areas, right? Okay. And as you see on the screen here, 3 patterns account for 75% of all security incidents. This is across all verticals, by the way. And I'll go into details with regards to public sector in a minute, right? But miscellaneous errors, privilege misuse, and crimeware are the 3 incident patterns across all verticals which accounts for 75% of the security incidents, right? Now let's take a perspective from a breach perspective. So every incident is not a breach, right? As I mentioned before. And there are 3 patterns accounted for 66% of the data breaches. The POS, obviously the point of sale patterns, it applies more to financial services than public sector, right? But the crimeware and cyber espionage, applies to an extent, right? So this gives you an overall perspective across all verticals, right? In terms of the incidents and the breaches. Now let's take a view for the public sector. What are the biggest threats to your organization, right? When you look at public sector, 80% of those 50,000 security incidents falls into 3 incident patterns, right? Miscellaneous errors, a user made an unintentional error, let's say for example, right? Physical theft of loss, you left a laptop on the back of the car seat and went to a restaurant or something, right? And privilege misuse, okay? No comments there. Self-explanatory there. So you can see 3 patterns accounts for 80% of the security incidents across the reported incidents across public sector. So this helps us to narrowly define where should we focus to start with at least. And just to give you a perspective on the financial services, because that was one of the top 3 impacted, vertical, you can see the difference for the financial services vertical is web application attacks, crimeware, and DOS attacks. So you can see it helps us to understand the bad threat actors. What is driving them? What's their motivation? What are they focusing on? And this is how our methodology helps you to define that further. So I thought I'll bring up the public sector perspective over here. And by the way, this is in the report as well. It's available online and very useful. Now, what you see on the left over here is the all industries, all vertical, and right-hand side is just the public sector. So let's just take 80% of the security incidents across public sector, how do they compare with other verticals? The top 3, physical theft or loss, 19. The highest is miscellaneous errors. I think collectively we can address this. I'll touch upon some various examples, various activities we could do. Perhaps you're already doing, but perhaps we need to improve on the robustness, the comprehensiveness, and the holistic aspect of the control to ensure it's more, robust and effective all the time, rather than not just one time. Yeah. But I think this provides you a very clear perspective with regards to public sector of the focus areas for us. Yeah. And the fourth one, 17, is the crimeware. But you can see the majority of the incidents in the previous 12 months are in these areas. Now, let's take, how long does it take? What does the timeline look like in the public sector, right? The time it took the attackers to carry out the compromise or the confirmed data loss was in seconds, almost in 80% of the security incidents. It doesn't take them a long time, right? How long does it take where the data was stolen? It takes us a very long time in a relative comparison to identify that the incident occurred and do something about it with regards to the containment. So you can ask the question is, okay, you have a control in place today, whether it's physical, whether it's procedure, whether it's technical control, how effective it is. Does it help you to detect the security incidents? And once you detect, what is the speed in terms of the containment of the impact? Right, so now this is the nefarious 9, we call it the data breaches. What we've tried to do as part of our DBIR report is, we just don't want to base the decision based on 1 year. So I've touched upon all the verticals in my previous. I touched upon the 9 incident patterns which I highlighted before, right? Okay, the 3 most impacted verticals. But what we tried to do, because we've been publishing this report now for almost a decade, it'll be nice to give you a perspective of how we're doing over the last 3 years. Is the bad threat actor continuing to focus on it? Are they going down? Or how effective our controls are, and so on. So we can take public sector, and if you take crimeware, you see the little bar charts, in each of the boxes over here. That's giving you a perspective of the 3-year period. So as a security professional, right, whether you're doing risk assessment, policies, developing secure architectures, and so on, you could ask the question, saying, how can this help you with your, next generation or whatever activities you're involved in? And you can use this report to provide as the backup, as the collateral to justify your business decisions. Yeah? Is there anything else out there which could provide you this level of information based on the real security incidents? Probably not to the extent we provide here today. So let's move forward. Where does the threat come from? So what you see on the screen over here is the last 5 years perspective. We are able to do this because we've been publishing for 10 years. And I'll showcase you some examples in various situations like 5 years to see how the threat is moving along. But the threat is external. 80% of threat remains external. It's continuous, pretty much flat, it's going a little bit here and there. Internal is there, and the partner is perhaps around 1 to 2%. And by the way, when there is a collaboration between the internal and the external, right, then we have to add the count in both the areas, right? So you might find that all the 3, the internal external partner, does not add up to 100%. It's always a little more because we have to, the way the methodology works, we have to add it in both the areas, right? But how do we use this? You could say, I have a perimeter defense in place, right? I have policies implemented. I have the world best technologies, the firewall, the IDS. I have the unified, threat management devices and so on. Great. Am I doing continuous monitoring? Is someone looking at capturing the logs, reviewing, doing a correlation against the threat and the intelligence in providing me the alerting and incident management 24/7 basis? Because the threat is coming external. So just an example for you. So this is 5 years of the actions which made the bad threat actor successful. So what we've done over here, we've taken the top 20 threat actions taken by the threat actors. And what you see on the screen here from 2009 to 2013, the last 5 years, I've just taken phishing as an example because I think we're all aware of the challenge we face as professionals. How many emails do you get? Yeah, you're going to earn millions, right? Those kind of emails and so on, right? How is phishing? You probably have done a lot of education and awareness. You probably have done some kind of a survey capture to see how effective the control and the education and awareness has been. But this is what we learned from the incidents we've analyzed over the last 5 years. Phishing was very much towards the bottom half of the top 20 in 2009. It's still pretty much staying to the top. And what this tells us is, one reading is that the bad threat actor feels that phishing is still, it makes them very successful quickly. And it's very easy to send emails out. And if you look at our previous year's report, they have organized campaigns. By the time they've sent 3 emails to their targeted audience, they have 50% of the targeted audience. How effective the phishing campaigns have been. Let's take some another example. So I've taken RAM scrapers and keyloggers. So you can see here that in finance, people say past does not guarantee the future. We all come across this in our human life, right? But you can see over here, the bad threat actor feels that the action they're taking here still makes them successful. The top 20 list has pretty much stayed constant. And by the way, when you look at our previous report, there is a pictographical representation of the last 8 years. I've just taken the last 5 just to have a meaningful representation here, right? But we can ask the questions ourselves, saying, okay, what are we doing to combat against use of stolen credentials, right? Or do we have two-factor authentication? I think you've probably been to a number of sessions over the last 2 days, right? Two-factor authentication, right? And I'll touch upon it, the SANS top 20 controls, because we work with the Office of the Cybersecurity Institute as well. But this gives you a stark reminder that even though you may have a policy in place, you implemented standards and frameworks and controls in place, it's time to review those. How effective are they? Because the bad threat actor continues to be successful against those areas. Right, now, common vulnerabilities, right? I think you have some kind of a vulnerability management program across the enterprise. You probably have some kind of scanners. You're doing continuous scanning across the enterprise, right? What does the 2015 DBIR report tell us? We saw 7 million vulnerabilities exploited in 2014. 7 million. But only 10 accounted for 97% of the attacks. And I'll list those out in a minute, right? So 7 million were exploited, but only 10 was involved in 97% of the attacks. And majority of them goes back to the year 2007. So the question for all of us as professionals is, are we doing patching? You have a patching policy, you're doing lots of activities, right? Okay. But still, the bad threat actors out there know where to focus on. In majority of the cases, the patches the CVE has been out there for over 12 months. So even though we may have a policy, we have programs in place, it's the comprehensiveness, it's the completeness, the holisticness is an area for us to focus on. And I'll give you some examples here. So what you see on the screen over here, on the bottom here, these are those 10 vulnerabilities. And I don't know if you can read this, but I've listed the years. So when you see 2002, 2002, 2001, these are the years when the CVE was published. I know this is across all verticals, but it gives you the perspective that, sometimes, when we are in our, if you ask as a security professional responsible for patching, I'm doing everything right. But there are still gaps in the program, right? So these are the top 10 ones. I'm not saying you just focus on those, but this is a perspective from the analysis of the security incidents which were shared with us by the 70 international organizations, right? That these were the top 10 vulnerabilities which were exploited in 97% of the attacks. And what we've also done, we've broken them down from 1999 to 2014. And you can see it goes back to 1999. That's like vintage patch, right? That comes in handy here, right? So 7 million vulnerabilities exploited in 2014, 99% compromised more than a year after CVE. So I think it's a challenge for us. It's a difficult question. When I speak to the CISOs across the country, very often they get a question from the senior leadership: how secure are we? It's a very simple question, right? But it's a difficult one, or perhaps it requires a long answer, right? Because you can see the challenge we're dealing with, right? And again, the threat actors are on a global basis, more resourceful, more organized. The motivation when it comes to the state sponsored, certainly at the highest level. But when you look at the public sector and the majority of the attacks, it's something which can be addressed. I thought I'd give an example of phishing. Phishing still remains a threat. A couple of examples. When the phishing email is sent out, 23% of the recipients opened the phishing messages. 23%. I think the number's gone down, right? But the first response starts in 82 seconds. So we still have some work to do when it comes to the education, the awareness, or perhaps exploring some technology controls which can help with addressing this area from a phishing perspective. And I think if you look at the kill chain, or in the most recent attacks even, right, is the bad threat actors are carrying out the compromise with real credentials. So you're unable to detect, because they're using the stolen credentials, right? And things like two-factor authentication, helps you to break that kill chain. You're familiar with the Lockheed Martin kill chain, the reconnaissance to the exfiltration of data, right? And it gives us a stark reminder here that perhaps you already have a two-factor authentication for remote users, but perhaps not across the business in all areas, right? So that's another area to focus on. Malware sophistication. Couple of things to highlight over here. 170 million malware events intercepted across 20,000 organizations in 2014. But you know what? The key aspect over here, the bad threat actors keep changing the code slightly. So the antivirus and the anti-malware signatures cannot pick that up. And in a lot of cases, it was written for the targeted organization. What you see here is 95% of the malware stuff showed up for less than 1 month. We all have challenges, 0-day vulnerabilities and so on, right? Okay. 4 or 5 started less than 1 week. So that's the challenge, for everyone involved in this. The vendors who are providing, the that solutions and so on. And that's what we deal with, right? So something we've learned from, the incidents and the breaches we analyzed in this year's report. We used to get questions, mobile devices, what's the perspective? So what we did was we took the Verizon wireless, mobile data. We went through some analysis, and what our analysis confirmed was, yet it's not a big threat, right? And in majority of the cases, I think it was about 0.03% very effective, but it was more of an add annoyance, right? So not a big problem right now, but I think, as we all know, IoT is down the road. Billions of devices are expected. If you look at it, across the organization, number of devices, each individual, you have a desktop, you have a laptop, you have an iPad, you have a smartphone, everything is going to be connected. So yeah, the one to look out for. But so far, our analysis based on, this year's report confirms it's not a huge problem for the industry based on the data which was available to us. This is the other area. Very often we used to get asked a question. It's great you help us understand the threat. You help us understand, who did what to whom, what was the outcome. But unless you can provide us some financial data, right, it is very difficult to justify the business. How do you justify, a huge amount of investments, right, for a specific control across the organization? So what we did was, we had one of our international contributors, in fact, I call it our net diligence, right, who's involved in cyber liability and data breach insurance claims. So what we did was, if you look at the industry out there, there are some reports out there, and they provide a perspective. Well, the approach Verizon has taken, as part of this report, this is the first time we published this year, is we analyzed about 190 plus cyber insurance claims, real claims submitted by organizations who were impacted with some form of a breach to the insurance company. We analyzed the real insurance claims submitted by those organizations, and our findings confirm that, bigger breach costs more, but the growth isn't linear. When there are smaller number of records involved, the cost per record is about $254 for up to 100 records. For millions, the cost drops to, a 9 cents a record. So the payout is more for larger organizations because of the number of records they have across the enterprise, right? But what we've tried to do is that in order to assist our customers and partners and so on, is we've submitted some ranges because, we're not saying this is perfect, but this is based on the real insurance claims. We have to follow the methodology based on what's available to us, right? When you look at the report, we provided some ranges based on some, our analysis and some assumptions we made, and it'll help you with your, business case or whatever activities you may have as part of your information security program across the enterprise, right? So have a look through the report, but the real point, the key point over here is based on the real cybersecurity insurance claims submitted by the organizations which are impacted. So it does provide you some real pragmatic perspective when it comes to the cost of cyber breach. So what can you do? I'm not saying the sky is falling down, we can't do anything. What can we do? So I've picked up on some areas for public sector which generated the highest amount of security incidents, and what could we do collectively to address those areas? So miscellaneous errors. Any mistake that compromises security, often carelessness and poor processes, right? And what you see on the bottom is the 36% of the incidents across the public sector. So I'm trying to show you the reference. How big is it a problem for public sector? And what can you do? Implement quality checkpoints. If you're sending an email to the distro, there's some examples given in the report as well, such as if you're doing mass mailings or if you're sending an email with some sensitive information, just take a pause and check who you're sending it to. The technology is great. It picks up email addresses from the past you may have, but that may not be the right audience, right? If you're publishing information, from a private to a public, make sure you're going through some kind of a review or so on. So you're not publishing, sensitive information into a public domain, right? Learn from the mistakes and those of the others. Don't repeat those, right? Right? So, as our data science, our research shares with you that this is a challenge to the industry, I think we can implement a number of activities across the organization to address this area. And by the way, 36% of the, of the incidents across the public sector was a result of miscellaneous errors. It's down to a common thing, human sensor, the human aspect. And I think we can collectively address that with a number of controls and processes in place. Secure disposable of assets. I think we all know about that. Perhaps we need to make it more effective and robust and completeness. Yes, sir?
When you say miscellaneous errors, you're talking about just downloading or fax.
Yeah, it could be, yeah. Or sending an email to an incorrect distro. Right? Publishing, a sensitive document outside the secure domain. Yeah. Let's take another one. Insider and privilege misuse. 25%, 1 in 4 incident was a result of insider privilege misuse. I think, it's misuse of access, typically by insiders, but outsiders feature too. So I think people have been granted access. There are areas and opportunities for us to review who has access to what. Let's understand our data, and ensure that you're reviewing the user behavior for suspicious activities. And I think one of the examples it brings is, especially when an employee is moving on or so on, monitor the large amount of data transfers through USBs or so on. That certainly we would recommend. But as you can see, a common thread, this is not rocket science. These are some things we could do to address the challenge, the incidents and the breaches which are occurring across the board. It requires certainly focus, but it can help you address the challenge we have across the public sector. Physical theft and loss. And again, I think it's very self-explanatory. Encryption of data. Encryption of data doesn't really stop the physical theft of loss, but at least it may, at least for the unsophisticated attackers, it makes it complex for them to access the real data. And encryption certainly helps you to protect and you reduce the classification down by at least by one level. And in certain compliance areas, you're demonstrating your enforcement of a specific control. Automate the backups. So if you automated the backups, at least when the asset is stolen or lost, what data resides on those, right? and lock the assets down. There are a number of solutions such as DLP solutions which will help you lock the assets down and so on. So these are the controls you may already have in place, but perhaps needs a review and ensure the completeness and the comprehensiveness across the enterprise. I just brought up crimeware because it was the fourth largest, 17% of the security incidents, right? And I think the two-factor, I think patching antivirus and browsers, I think everybody's probably doing that, right? Implement configuration change monitoring. Whenever there's a huge change, whether it's by a privileged user or not, ensure there's some form of monitoring in place. Even if you look at the recent breaches in one of the, such as OPM and so on, there's a recommendation of having a continuous monitoring and so on. So the detection deficit. The message over here, as I move towards the last few minutes of wrapping up this session, is what you see on the screen over here is the last 10 years, right? The line you see at the bottom, the time to discover, this is for the good guys, right? Is how long does it take in terms of minutes and hours in a day to discover that an incident was occurring across the enterprise. And the line you see on the top is time to compromise for the bad threat actors, the bad guys, and how effective are they in carrying out a compromise within hours or less, right? As you can see, the smallest deficit on record, we all as security professionals have been working on it. The recent breaches has certainly made this as an executive board level issue. We have a lot of commitment, we have a lot of focus. I think the budget is coming much better than before. Right? Okay, because of the recent breaches has perhaps helped us in some cases, right? But it still demonstrates that the deficit between incident occurring across the enterprise and it being detected, right? And that is the challenge we have as professionals, and we need to bring this deficit down, reduce the deficit down, improve the detection intensity. Verizon works with the Cybersecurity Institute, the SANS top 20 controls. So what you see over here are the top 20 SANS controls. And when you look at the recommendations, the analysis of of the incidents in this year's report, they are mapped to top 20. Now, as you all know as security professionals, the SANS top 20 controls were written originally by NSA in 2008, 2009 timeframe. It's been out there for a number of years. I think a survey done by the State Department says that if you focus on these top 20, it addresses 96% of the risk areas and so on. There's some great white papers and articles available. I've got the link there as well. But the message over here is the findings from our report, in 2015 report, how it maps into to the SANS top 20 controls, right? And 40% is in the quick wins category. So if you focus on the analysis of the Verizon's data breach investigations report, the SANS top 20 controls, it gives you a great headway. I just brought this slide up because I was talking to some Verizon colleagues over here, my colleagues, and there was a recent audit report out in the state of California and so on. It highlighted the incident response and so on. And Verizon provides this service as part of the MIGTA and the CAL agreement in place today. I thought I'll ask a quick question. As the data breach investigation report from Verizon and the recent articles in the media, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when, right? How many of you in the audience feel that if there was any unwanted activity across your enterprise, once you have the necessary forensics or retainer support in place, you feel satisfied and comfortable with to address the situation? Any hands up? No? Okay. So, okay, I think it's self-explanatory. I don't need to say more, but I think where I'm coming from here is that we've been providing forensic services since the year 2004. We provide this to across all the verticals, and I think it's something to look at, to review, because as I mentioned, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And when the moments arrive, the seconds count, right? So have some form of a retainer or a forensic service where the service provider has the expertise on maybe a global basis, can provide you assistance within the agreed SLA within 24 hours or within the defined time period, so that you're supported for the containment and the investigative and the forensic support, going forward. So that's the link, and I've got about a few minutes left if there are any questions. Yes, sir. Yeah.
and patches being available and all that. We have a situation where I work where we have a business critical function on the server that cannot be upgraded because it's an old version of
Software.
software.
Right.
It's business critical, but it's on Windows 2003, so you have all these high risk vulnerabilities out there that will exploit it, but you can't get a patch.
Right.
So you just have to write that off as an acceptable risk. Well, the director does; it's their job to do that. But in terms of that fact, is there a lot of that you've seen witnessing out on the other firms out there?
Sure. So great question. So I think the question is business critical function. There's an asset across the enterprise. It's called old piece of software. In this particular case, the Windows 2003 operating system. I didn't get the reasons why it could not be upgraded, right? But it was a ticketing system, right? Okay. And the question is, what do I see? I attended a SCADA session, and I'll share this with you, right? There was a similar question on that front as well. And when you look at some SCADA systems, right, critical systems involved in the energy, the utility companies, and so on, you do come across a lot of that, the legacy environments, because, perhaps it's not the focus, right? But I think if I give you my perspective from a commercial versus the public sector, you will see a lot less in the commercial minus the SCADA environment versus the public sector. But I think it's getting better. As the focus is there and so on. Yeah, that would. But ultimately, I think the response is acceptance of risk. Signing of the residual risk across the enterprise by the senior risk owner across the organization, right? So that the risk is clearly understood, recorded, and signed off by the right risk owner that this asset is an old ticketing system, as you mentioned, cannot be upgraded for the following business reasons, and the risk is understood, whether it's from a confidentiality, integrity, or availability perspective. I think that's the right approach, is acceptance of risk, yeah, if you cannot justify the investments to upgrade it. Yeah, thank you. Yes, sir.
Given that the CVEs that you're seeing in the breaches are older,
yeah.
Are you seeing organizations that are being breached? Are they being breached on those systems that are legacy versus newer systems?
Okay, so the question is, where do we see the breach? In the legacy systems or otherwise? And I think as our analysis confirms that the vulnerability were published in those specific years, or the 2002 went back to 2007, right? It provides you a perspective on the type of assets, like was it a web application or so on, based on the incident pattern. But it doesn't go into the business context, to that extent. But it certainly ties into the vulnerability when the CVE was published and the type of asset involved in that particular case. Any other question? Yes, sir. I couldn't hear. I'm sorry. Okay, great question. Okay, so the question is, does the report helps us to confirm where this origination of threat is? What's the source? Right, okay, right. So is it coming from a specific country, specific region, and so on? Yes, the report does confirm that. If you go back to our previous year's reports, it defines the origination of threat by country involved, and I'm more than happy to send you a copy of that, the previous year's report. It defines the name of the country and the motivation and a lot more information about the threat actor which was involved in those cases. So if you wanted to understand, for example, where the threat is coming from, is it coming from APAC region or is it coming from domestic? Yeah, it does provide in the previous report. This year's report does not have that kind of information, but we did publish in the past years, yes. Okay, so I assume there's no more questions. So from my perspective and on behalf of Verizon, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time and the questions.